Hi family, I'm an alcoholic. My name is Shari H.A.L.T. My sobriety date is January the 18th, 2015. By the grace of God, I'll have 10 years, God willing. I have a home group, I have a sponsor, my sponsor has a sponsor, his sponsor has a sponsor. I have a long line of sponsors who deliver me messages on a daily. So experience, strength, and hope, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. You know, we all hear that and how it works, and really that's what it is. It's just our experience, strength, and hope. That's all I have to share. I grew up in New York, if you can't tell. I have an older sister. She's 3.5 years older than me. My father was head of the narcotics task force for the New York City Police Department. And I grew up with loving parents. My sister and I had a lot of sibling rivalry. There was a lot of fear that started at a very young age because I was very scared of her, and her and I really didn't get along very well, and I rode that all the way to everything that I did on a daily basis was all fear-based. Everything was fear-based. I believe in my heart of hearts, and I've never thought otherwise, that I was born with this disease of alcoholism. And it started very young. The furthest back memory I can actually remember was, I think, 2 years old, which not many people can remember that far back. But I remember my first feeling, and my first feeling was fear. We lived in an apartment in the Bronx, and we had a flood in our apartment. And I remember my mother's friend was taking me away in a stroller because she had to keep me at her house while they cleaned up from the flood and stay there because we were flooded. And I remember that feeling of fear. I was being taken away from my mother, and I was scared. And, you know, it only went on from there. You know, and things happened in my life that caused me more fear. And that fear caused me to become a liar out of fear. And that fear caused me to act out of fear. And eventually that fear caused me to pick up a drink. Fear became my coping mechanism. Lying became my coping mechanism. Justification for my lies became my coping mechanism. And those all were my character defects, and I never felt like I fit in, so I had to lie and put this mask on and become a different person so that you would like me, accept me, give me accolades. I never felt like I was worth anything. I never felt like I had any kind of special talent. I had friends who played sports, friends who played musical instruments, friends who sang. I always wanted to be like them. I never wanted to be who I was. I didn't know who I was. I just knew that I felt like I didn't belong and I wasn't special. I tell this story, and I told it when I did my step series, and I spoke on the 6th step. I was talking about all my character defects, and I was talking about how I tried every musical instrument in elementary school. Everyone. I went from the flute to the violin and they only lasted like 2 weeks because I had like severe ADD. So each instrument I would just give up on. And I wanted so badly to fit in that I would have tried anything to be somebody and to have somebody say, wow, she's a great flutist or a great piano player, or she's great at softball. I tried softball. I was like 38 pounds in the 4th grade, and very uncoordinated. And, you know, they put me all the way in right field. And the last game, I finally caught the ball. And and then I didn't know where to throw it. And I stood there, and they were screaming at me, throw the ball, throw the ball. I didn't even know where to throw the ball. You know, I was just so uncoordinated, and so sports was not my thing, and musical instruments were not my thing. And then one day I come home with a cello, dragging it, walking home from school the whole way, thinking like, this is going to be the instrument. This is going to be the one. And my mother, I remember she was like, the cello? You couldn't have found anything smaller? You have to drag this to and from school every day, and where are we going to keep it in the house? And that didn't last very long. So I gave up on all of that, and you know, going along in life, and you know, I got into junior high school. Down here they call it middle school. Up there it's junior high school, and then I on to high school. And I remember freshman year was the first year, or I was about to go into my freshman year, and I decided that I was going to try alcohol. I was 14 years old, and I got my sister to buy us a 4-pack of Bartles and James berry wine coolers, and I had one, and that's all it took. And it wasn't like I said, gee, let me just try it and sip it and see how my body reacts to it. It was, let me down it and feel the effects as quickly as I can. And my body was virgin to any substances at this point. So to have that mindset that I'm just gonna not care and drink the entire thing and not even know how I'm gonna react to it, to me, that was an alcoholic mind. That was alcoholism. So I drank it. I got taken home because I was so drunk, and we were at my friend's house, and her mother used to let her drink, but only at the house, or, you know, a sip here and there. So she said, you gotta take her home. She can't be here like this, and we're gonna get in trouble that she was drinking at the house. And I went home, and my sister and I shared a bedroom, and she kept telling me, if the room's spinning, just put one foot on the floor. And that didn't work, so I threw my guts up, swearing I was never gonna do it again, ever, ever, ever. And a week later, I was at another friend's house, doing it all over again. Because I have an insane mind as an alcoholic. And I think I'm just gonna keep on doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. But the truth is that it never changes for me. It only gets worse. So by 16, I was trying weed. By 19, I was trying coke. And it just went on from there. And so you know, for me, it didn't matter the substance. It was anything that stopped that noise in my head. Anything that gave me superpowers. I was Superwoman on these things. And the substance to me never mattered. It didn't matter what I was addicted to or what I tried. Those were my solution. Those were my solution to the problem that lay between my ears, which was my alcoholic mind. Because I suffer from alcoholism, not alcoholism. Every day I wake up and I have alcoholism. And it's untreated till I treat it. And I had this alcoholism and I didn't understand it. All I knew is that I had this overwhelming fear, this need to be right all the time, this need to be fitting in and be better than you and be right, even when I knew I was wrong. And the only thing that made it better was a drink or a drug. So I went on and I decided at the age of 22, after many failed jobs and being on unemployment and just hanging out with the wrong crowd, that I convinced my parents that I was going to move to Florida because the sunshine was going to cure me. I told them that the sun was going to cure me and that I just needed to get away from the drug dealer and his girlfriend and start, you know, fresh. So I moved to South Beach. I'll wait. Thinking that, you know, why not, right? My parents had a vacation apartment here in Aventura, and they wouldn't even let me stay in it because, you know, they were like, no way. So I moved down to South Beach, swearing that the drugs are the problem and not the alcohol. And still drinking but not drugging. And by 2 months, I had overdosed on a substance in South Beach, and my friends called my parents and said, if you don't take her out of here, the next flight home she's going to take is in a coffin. So they happened to be down here visiting, and they had a little intervention, and they gave me a choice, and they said, you need to either come home with us and go to treatment, or you could stay here and we never speak to you again. I had no money. I had just totaled my little Mazda Miata. I had rented a room in somebody's house in Hialeah. I was a hot mess. And I knew that my parents were the only ones left on this earth that loved me and would take care of me. So I went home with them. And I was waiting for a bed at a treatment center. And while I was waiting for a bed, I met a bunch of people from AA, and they started taking me around meetings. And the one person I met was to become my next higher power, and his name was Jeff. And Jeff had 7 years. And so I went away to the rehab because my parents said, even though I had gotten in with AA and I was going to meetings and picked up a sponsor in name only, that I still needed to go to treatment. So I went to treatment. Oh, it was awful because I wasn't in surrender or acceptance. I was parent ordered. I wasn't stopping for me. I didn't have barely any consequences except my parents were mad at me and I lost a few jobs. I had no legal consequences at the time. I didn't have a child at the time. And I hadn't been to jail yet. And I just felt like, I would just do it for them to stay in their good graces. So I went to rehab, and I remember I would call my mom complaining, there's a guy in here with only one leg because he had a DUI and he lost his leg and I don't belong here. And there's another guy who shoots drugs and I never shot drugs. And I gave them every excuse in the book. And thank God they stood firm and they left me there. But the minute I came out of this rehab and went back to AA, I immediately sought after my higher power, Jeff, and got into a relationship immediately. And I really didn't know that this lovely boy who had 7 years was a dry drunk and wasn't working these lovely 12 steps that would bring me to a spiritual awakening and a relationship with God, who will now be my new solution. I had no idea. I was very new. I just didn't have a clue. And that relationship that kept me sober, because that was all that was keeping me sober, was a 7-month relationship. And after that, I stayed sober on other things because I only did one side of the triangle. The triangle comes in 3 sides: unity, service, and recovery. And I was only doing the unity part. I was going to meetings, sitting in the back, cleaning a couple ashtrays. Way back then in 1995, we had smoking in the meetings, and one of the service positions was to clean the ashtrays, and I would, and then I would run right out of the meeting. I never opened the big book. I never sought after a higher power. I thought I was the higher power, and I thought that I fixed my problem. I thought that the alcohol and the drugs was my problem. I didn't realize that the alcohol and the drugs was my solution to my problem. So I'm in these meetings. I'm going to fellowship with these people after the meetings. I was good for an AA picnic and a potluck. I'll bring a dish, but that's where it began and that's where it ended. And I stayed in sobriety, like I like to call it. Sobriety for 6.5 years. But in that 6.5 years, I probably got about 6 more higher powers with different various names to fill that void in my life and that hole in my soul and to feed my codependency. I did a lot of shopping and spending, gambling, lying, stealing, cheating, manipulating, and my whole life was full of fear. And I was sicker in those rooms for 6.5 years than I was when I was using. Because at least when I was using, I had my solution of drugs and alcohol. When I took those away, I was left with nothing but a problem and causing more problem in my life. So after 6.5 years, I moved back to Florida a couple times, and now I moved back for good in 2001, and I decided, because now I was with another guy, and he was a normie, and I was 29 years old, and I called my sister, and I convinced her that I think I need to drink tonight. I think I'm going to go back to alcohol, just alcohol, because, drugs were my problem. Alcohol wasn't my problem. Because I was having trouble with the boyfriend, and I thought that if I just drank like him, he's a normal drinker, and that would bring me more social, and I'd be able to go out with him and his friends all the time, and life would be grand. And so my sister, who is a great co-signer of all my BS, she validated it for me, and she said, I think you're right. You were in your early 20s, and, you were really hanging around the wrong crowd, and I think try it. So I went out that night, and I had 2 drinks. And that was the beginning of my 14-year relapse. And those 2 drinks lasted me 14 years. He left 2 days later. Clearly, alcohol and drinking like him was not the problem. I was the problem. We were the problem. I didn't know how to have healthy relationships. I was nowhere near ready to have a healthy relationship, or to even think that I could fix an unhealthy relationship, because I was clueless who I even was. So 14 years, in that 14 years, my progression was slow as far as the substances. I was bat poop crazy, though, I will tell you. And I managed to go back to school and finish nursing school. I got my RN. And it's funny, I got my RN because I wanted initials after my name. I wasn't thinking about all the people I could help. Now today, 20 plus years later, I'm in it for a whole different reason. It has nothing to do with the initials after my name. I love caring for people and taking care of people and being of service to them. But back then, it was all about accolades. And so I finished nursing school. I got with another guy right before I went to nursing school. He became the father of my child. I had a daughter. She's going to be 20. She's an amazing, amazing, beautiful child. But for the first almost 10 years of her life, it was hell for her. So she was 1.5 years, and I left her dad, and I moved up. We were living in Hallandale Beach, and I moved up to Palm Beach County because my parents were now live down here, and I needed to be close to them if I was going to be a single mom. And I was self-will run riot. And she endured a crazy mom. It was very crazy. We talk about it today, we laugh about it now, but it really wasn't funny at the time. And, I know God. I had God working in my life. I can look back and see all the times he saved me. But I didn't know God. I had no relationship with God. I was spiritually and morally bankrupt. I didn't know how to teach her morals or respect. The home was volatile. Relationships, men in and out of the house. It was never stable for her, and I thank God for my mother because she took her for like 3-4 nights a week because I was working. I was very functioning. And then I met another guy and ended up in a relationship with him, and I met him through the drug dealer. That was such a healthy relationship, and it was so toxic. And for 10 months straight, I did nothing for 24/7 but drugs and alcohol while I was in that relationship, and I functioned and I went to work like that. And one day my daughter said, I was getting ready to go to my Christmas party for work. You know, my daughter is brilliant. Like, really brilliant. And she started noticing my patterns. And she would call me out on my stuff, and I would yell at her and send her to her room. And this one night, I guess she just had enough, and she saw me run outside, told her to stay in the house like I always did, and I'll be right back. And I ran outside to grab my stuff from the guy who was pulling up to hand it to me. And she ran out of the house. She didn't care. She was like, I'm done. And she went running back in, crying and screaming the whole way into the house. And I went running in the house, and I said to her, I told you to stay in the house. And she started crying, and she said, Mommy, I can't do this anymore. She was 9. It was a month before her 10th birthday. I can't do this anymore. I don't want to live with you anymore. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I want to go live with Nana. Nana's a good woman. She's a good mom. And she'll take really good care of me. And she won't yell at me. And she won't punish me. And she won't sleep all weekend while I sit in my pajamas waiting for you to wake up and take me somewhere. I deserve to have a good life. 9 years old. And I said, well, it doesn't work like that, sweetheart. I'm your mother and I own you. You're my daughter. She said, well, Mommy, I Googled and I'm going to call DCF on Monday. And you know, for like a month before this day, I was looking at my life like a house of cards. You ever see those house of cards? You build a house with cards, and anything can knock them over at any time. And I had a lot of yets. I'd yet to get a DUI. I'd yet to lose my nursing license. I'd yet to go to jail for any period of time. I had like 2 misdemeanors in my life. I'd yet to lose my daughter. And for like a month before, I kept saying, oh, I'm going to get caught one of these days. They're going to test me at work, or I'm going to come in too hungover. They're going to know. So it was like drilling in the back of my mind. And God probably didn't know what to do with me or how to get to me, so he used her as his little vessel. And it was at that moment I watched. In my mind, I could see that house of cards just falling down. And I knew this was it. And I started to cry, and I said, listen, please don't call DCF. Mommy knows where to go. And I'm going to go get help, and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to be the best mother you've ever had. And she started crying and apologizing. I'm sorry, Mommy, I didn't mean to upset you. Please don't cry. And I said, no, don't you cry. I'm the one who needs to cry. So I dropped her off at my friend's where she was going to stay for the night, and me and the toxic man went to the Christmas party. And we're fighting the whole party and doing drugs at the party because I figured I already have it. I might as well have my last night out there, right? And we're on our way home, and I call the dealer for something else. And you know, God's funny, man. God uses every person to get to a suffering alcoholic or addict that he needs to use. And he came to the house. I'll never forget, it was about midnight. And he sat down at the table, and he slid a bag across to me. And he said, this is your last one. And I said, are you kidding me? I pay your mortgage. He goes, I got 10 of you paying my mortgage. I don't do kids. Your kid ran after my car. You need to take a break. See, that was the grace of God. That was God doing for me what I could not do for myself. He wanted to ensure that I was going to do what I told my daughter I was going to do, and that the next day I was going to go to a meeting. So I stayed up the entire night, January 17th to the 18th. I stayed up the entire night on the AA Intergroup website, trying to time my alcohol and drugs to the time of the meeting. well, if I finish by this time, I can hit this meeting. If I have none left by this time, I can hit this meeting. So at 8:30 in the morning, I hit a meeting in Boca. I was living in Boca at the time. Oh, man, my feet were heavy walking through that parking lot. But I knew where I had to go. I knew what I had to do. And I knew I had to do all three sides of the triangle. Because if I didn't, I wasn't going to make it. And I walked into the rooms of AA. And I surrendered. I surrendered with all I had. I gave it all to the rooms because I still had no God of my understanding. I had no belief. And I remember those women grabbed me after the meeting. And they told me things like, you never have to feel this way again. You're not alone. We're here for you. Here's our number. Call us. We're your family now. And I had no choice but to believe them. What else was I going to do? I had no friends left. My family was pretty much done with me. My own daughter didn't want me as her mother. And I jumped in the middle. I jumped in the middle of this program. I got a sponsor immediately. She was a temporary sponsor because she was a snowbird and she was moving back to Connecticut in a few weeks, and she said, you have 2 weeks to get a permanent sponsor, and I did. And at first I picked sponsors by their pocketbook and their shoes, and I thought I wanted what they had on the outside, and I didn't realize that it was all that they had on the inside. And it took me 4 sponsors in 2.5 years, and 3 more years with the toxic boyfriend to finally surrender and finish all my steps and surrender to this way of life and to build a relationship with God. And, I tell this story because it's so important to me. The day I had my spiritual awakening. My daughter went to a really fancy camp in New York for sleepaway, and it was for a lot of kids there who grew up very privileged. And it was a camp that I really couldn't afford without my family would all pitch in. And I think they did it because they wanted to give her a break from me for the summer, for 8 weeks, and just let her be a kid and have fun and have friends. And, so I had just finished taking my first sponsee through all 12 steps. And she had one of her camp friends stay over the house, and I went to drive her home to this fancy neighborhood in Boca. And I went to drop her off at her house, and the dad was outside, and we were playing Facebook geography and looking up if we had mutual friends, and it was like, and he had 2 nice cars in the driveway, and he was telling me, yeah, I know that guy from graduate school, and I know her from my wife who was in her sorority with her. And I'm driving home and I'm beating myself up. And I'm having a real good old pity party for myself. And I get to this light by my house. And I'm saying to myself, I never went to graduate school. I never joined a sorority. I don't have that nice car that he has. I don't have that nice house. My community's not gated. I struggle. I don't have a good job like they have. And God smacked me right at that light. He said to me, my child, you have so much purpose, and that's all you need. You see, there's a huge war out there called alcoholism and addiction. And there's an epidemic going on. And I've saved you to be my soldier in that war. So you can help bring a message to my children. And there's no greater purpose in your life than that. It doesn't matter the cars. It doesn't matter the degrees. It doesn't matter about initials after your name. It doesn't matter about the house. I've equipped you with something that those people will never have. And you work for me now. And that final 9-step promise of not regretting the past, nor wishing to shut the door on it, came true for me. I felt a peace above anything I've ever known. And I started to just do service as much as I could and find as many people as I could to help. And I dug deep. And then when I was about 3.5 years sober, I had a new sponsor, and she said to me, "Your picker's broken. You keep picking these horrible men. You have this little 13-year-old girl," she was 13 now, "and your picker's broken. And I'm not going to let you date or be with a man until she turns 18, because that's your job to raise her." And I was like, this woman's crazy, but she's probably right. She said, "You need to work on yourself." So I started reading books on codependency and trying to dig deep and figure out why I picked the men I did and why I had no worth. And, 2 years to the day, out of nowhere, my husband, who I used to work with at the hospital, texted me, and I chased this man for 11 years. And he wanted no part of me. I don't blame him. I was out of my mind. He texted me for someone's number, and it got into a conversation, and the next thing you know, I was going on a date with him. And now we're married. We were married for 1.5 years. I finally got married at 51, and it was amazing. Big AA wedding. It was phenomenal. And it's so funny. On our first date, I'll never forget this. Now, this is 2 years I didn't date. I worked on myself. And I said to him on the date, I said, I have a feeling this is going to move on to a second date. I'm really enjoying myself. He said, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too. I said, I have one question. What's your relationship like with God? Because if this is ever going to work, our foundation needs to be set in God. And he looked at me like I was crazy, because who says that on a first date? And I explained that I was in recovery and that was my solution, and I needed to stay spiritually fit on a daily basis. And he said, well, I don't believe in God. I have a very scientific belief. He said, when I did my psych rotation in school, all the schizophrenic patients thought that they were the Son of God, and that's what I started to believe, that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was schizophrenic walking around telling everybody he was the Son of God. I said, well, that's pretty understandable for somebody who's never felt the grace of God or never recognized it. But if this is ever going to work, our relationship has to start with God. And he said, well, I'll try whatever you have if it's going to get me a second date. And I said, okay. And then I started bringing him around Stevie B. I'm sure many of you know Stevie B. And I started bringing him to church, and he's a man of God today. And he tells all my AA friends who are now like his family, I found God in AA. You see, this program can work for anyone, even non-alcoholics. Because it's a set of spiritual principles that bring us to a relationship with God, who becomes our solution for everything. And all I have to do is treat it on a daily basis. Whether I'm treating codependency, alcoholism, drug addiction, none of it matters. It doesn't matter what you're here for or what got you here. I have a sponsee, he tells me all the time, I'm not an alcoholic. My problem was fentanyl. I said, okay. So if I took all the fentanyl on earth away, but I told you could drink because you're not an alcoholic, how quick do you think you'd become an alcoholic? Oh yeah, okay. Whatever solution works to kill the noise in your head, right? So I had to find a new solution because none of those other solutions were working anymore. And my solution is God. And my purpose is to help his children. And that is my primary purpose. is just to help God's children. And that's why God saved me so many times. And he didn't just save me from death, he saved me from myself. So if you're not doing all three sides of the triangle, you're really missing out on a life beyond your wildest dreams. And my life has zero to do with anything material. My life has to do with freedom. That is the greatest gift I was ever given by God. Was freedom from the bondage of self and from the obsession to drink or put any substance in my body. My advice, get a sponsor and work the steps through this big book. It's a very simple program. We complicate the hell out of it, though. If you're on the fence, I can promise you, try it our way. If it doesn't work, we'll gladly refund your misery. Thank you.